So for the last panel of the day, we would like to discuss what is the capacity of blockchain in changing the gaming ecosystem. And in order to revolutionize gaming, builders and developers in blockchain must overcome hurdles such as cost, speed, and scalability. So the title of this panel is called AAA Studios Thinking Blockchain. Now think of AAA as movie blockbusters. So basically, typically a game developed by a large studio and costs a fortune. So yeah, we have a really great panelists coming up. So please give them your last bit of attention before you inject yourself with alcohol at the after parties. So let's hear what they have to say. Introducing our moderator for this panel, John Jordan, the Director of Communications at DappRadar. And for our panelists, I shall let our video do justice on their introduction. So please put your hands together for our next panel of speakers.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. So for the next 35 minutes, we're going to be talking about blockchain games in the context of AAA games, so kind of the really high-end stuff, and thinking maybe why blockchain games aren't there yet and how they might get there. So I have an excellent group of panelists who all have plenty of experience of AAA games over many years. I guess if we just work our way through, you guys can introduce yourselves, I guess say a little bit about what you've been doing in games. Not too long, because we've only got 35 minutes. And a little bit about how you got into blockchain. OK? Daniel?
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, this works. So I'm Daniel DOLL-STEINBERG. I've spent my career in disruptive technologies over 25 years. Learned about the blockchain in 2016 and was the first of the 4 founders of the Atari token project, going into gaming mainly because it's got such a fast refresh cycle, and I thought blockchain was so fundamental to it. I'm now a director and a shareholder of the Atari token project, and I really look at market adoption for other technologies in this space.
My name is John Linden. I was a former studio head of Activision Blizzard, so I ran one of the game studios there, mostly around Call of Duty. So we did 4 Call of Duties, we did a Skylanders game. I left there and had another mobile studio called Seismic Games that we sold last year after we put out a game called Marvel Strike Force. We sold that to Niantic, the guys that make Pokemon Go. And now I'm with Mythical Games. How I got in blockchain, I think this is a big paradigm shift that's happening. I think what we're excited about, well, there's a lot of things we'll talk about later, I guess, but a lot of things to be excited about. I think the biggest thing for us is that I think we see this as kind of the early days of mobile again. And not only this time will we see a platform shift, but this is a shift that could actually affect all games and all platforms. And I think that's a very exciting opportunity ahead of us. So, Nicholas.
Hi, so.
Oh, you're not on.
You hear me? No? Yeah? I don't know. Okay, so my name is NICOLAS. I joined Ubisoft 5 years ago at the Strategic Innovation Lab. And so we are exploring blockchain for 2 years now. We built a small team within Ubisoft working on that with several developers, lawyers also, and a lot of support of our CEO. We are also working closely with the Entrepreneurs Lab, which is a startup program in Paris, but also in Singapore, and in which we work with, I think now we are at 10 startups, blockchain startups. And for instance, here we work with Planetarium, they have a booth here, and Mighty Jacks. Okay, and so yes, we are exploring all what a huge publisher at Ubisoft can do with this new technology.
Great. Is it forward and fine? Yeah. So my name is Yat. I'm the chairman and co-founder of a public company called Animoca Brands, which is double downing on blockchain and NFTs at the moment. My gaming background, my first job was with Atari back when there was the Atari ST, so I'm actually very old. Anyway, we were just joking about one night in Bangkok, so yes, we're just, anyway, old guys. So I've been in gaming for like 3 decades, and we've done MMOs when we're sort of in the China space. I guess mobile, our first big mobile game in 2000 and late 2010, 2011 was a game called Pretty Pet Salon, if anyone remembers, which is kind of ridiculous but incredible. And sort of, I see many parallels of the same eras. Mobile gaming shift to today, and then of course now with blockchain, we've done now over 20 blockchain-related investments. We're just, and my blockchain moment was really for NFTs was we had an investment in a studio called POUARD, which was involved in building CryptoKitties, and the founder of that business ended up becoming sort of one of the co-founders of CryptoKitties. And we're just like, whoa, what's CryptoKitties all about? And that kind of catapulted us into that space. And we've been big believers in the potential future ever since.
Good. Thanks, guys. So I guess let's set the scene. It's good mention of CryptoKitties there. So CryptoKitties, I guess, was the kind of first blockchain game that kind of came to prominence. In no way, I guess, could you call it a AAA game in the sense of what we're talking about. And I don't really think, maybe we'll discuss this later, I don't really think we've moved on a lot in terms of our blockchain games getting any more AAA-like, I think. But to start us off, the game space in total is about $140 billion of annual revenue. And I guess that's what we broadly think about when we think about the AAA space. So it's pretty big, it's growing pretty fast. Does it need blockchain? Is that the reason that AAA game companies are not getting into blockchain? What is the fundamental? What is the why would games and blockchain go together? I guess. John, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll take that first. So I mean, first of all, some of the big studios. A couple things out there is that games take a long time to make. I mean, I think that's the first and foremost. Like to build a big world, there's world building, there's gameplay, there's tuning, there's economy drives, there's quest loops, there's meta. There's a lot of stuff that goes into a game. So I think one, we're a little early still. Like we were talking earlier, though, we've been very proud of. We have a game coming out and going into beta before too long. I can't say when yet, or I'll get crushed by my marketing team. But we were very proud of the fact that we're nearly at a beta phase after a year and a half versus the last like 3 games we did at Activision and Seismic. It was 3.5 years release cycle. So we're still pretty early. So I think that's the first part. The second part is I think it depends on what you're talking about with blockchain. I think. Do blockchain AAA games need a token economy right now? Not really, because they already have that. They have a virtual currency economy. It's a very common concept for games to have these virtual currencies and items and all that. However, I do think that blockchain brings out an evolution in gaming, right? The ability to have a blockchain-backed asset or an ownable, player-owned asset can suddenly create, it immediately creates 2 marketplaces, right? You have a primary and secondary marketplace, and all types of things come out of that. So the way we kind of view it, and I think what we've talked to a lot of the other big studios as well, is they view it as a palette of tools, and the palette of tools just isn't quite ready for consumers yet. But it is coming. There's a lot of really amazing new innovations, and we can definitely go through some of the specifics if you want, in terms of what you can do with that palette of tools from the AAA side, and I think you will see all games at some point will have an aspect of this. Just we're still early.
Would you like to put a time frame on that?
Yeah, sure. I think what we'll see is I think this year was a little rough. I think we saw some really cool stuff with CryptoKitties and that. And again, I think they did some great stuff. Not a game. It's a gamified market at the end of the day, right? It's a gamified marketplace, which is awesome, and that's what made it cool. But to make CryptoKitties into like a big 3D world and all that, there's just no way. There's just a finite amount of time to do that, right? So I think what we're seeing right now is we've seen a lot more of the same. There's been a lot more of the same this year. I think next year there's going to be some real games now, right? So the way we kind of view it is that in a traditional game, there's 4 I'm sorry, I'm talking all the time, but I'll finish this thought and I'll let you guys talk. There's kind of 4 main player types in a lot of free-to-play games, right? You have the whales, you have the hardcore that buy a lot, you have the casual, and then you have the free-to-play that don't really ever spend anything. The games we have out right now are only whales. So it's not really a full economy yet, right? And there's games coming out. I know you have a game coming out that everybody's excited about for next year. We have a game coming out next year that are true games. Like you could play it and never think about blockchain. And I think next year will be the first time to wake that up. So,
Nicolas, I guess we've often said it's funny that Ubisoft is the one kind of big established games company that openly talks about blockchain, says it has a team researching that. Why do you think the other companies don't, and why is Ubisoft the only one to kind of take this bold step?
Yeah, That's a tough question. I can't speak for the company. I don't know, but what I can say that firstly, everyone knows that it's not a very mature tech today, and so it's like difficult for developers that are working with a big engine, working on Anvil or other engine, to say, okay, we will use a tech that nobody used before and see if we can do a product for millions of players. So I think that's the first obstacle here. And also it takes time to make you said, hey, why don't we see a AAA game now using blockchain? It takes time to build a AAA games. And so it's a disruptive or innovative tech, so we have to learn, and then we can use our experience to see how it can fit with our engine again, and our tools also, internal tools. And then we have also to wait for designers to understand what they can do with these tools, and then you can build something. So it just takes time, I think.
Yeah. Good.
No, yeah.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
I guess I just wanted to tap onto what John was saying quickly, because what we think is particularly exciting about sort of what gamers can get out of this is ownership. And I think while the aspect of ownership is a little bit vague at the moment because gamers don't understand it, one thing to understand is that actually the gaming industry, that 140 billion, 70 billion, which is basically freemium purchases, is from whales as well, right? And the average conversion rate is like 1.5%, which basically means that everyone else is playing for free, right? So if you can actually have ownership, one of the theses that we believe in, true ownership will increase that conversion. Because there's already 2.5 billion gamers. That's like more than half the connected world, right? So the growth area of gaming is also kind of halted. People are now talking about, 7, 8, 9% gaming growth. That's great. But in the days of mobile, it was like 30, 40, 50% growth, right? And if we talk about how can gaming become a $1 trillion industry, we think ownership will do that, because we think people would much rather own what they play rather than lease effectively.
But also it creates two new player types, and I think that's what we're excited about. And I think one question I've gotten asked a lot about our game is what's a win for next year when the game comes out, right? Obviously money. Money's great. The volume of players is great. But I think the real win is going to be, we think there's two additional player types that aren't really seen in freemium games now, right? So CryptoKitties introduced one of them. It's the speculator trader. And it's a powerful segment, right? It's a powerful segment of people buying a user, buying an asset, and speculating on it. Is it going to go up? Can I combine it with something else and get something rare? That's a very powerful segment that we don't see in the total addressable market right now. I think the other one that I'm really fascinated about is exactly what you kind of mentioned, is if you give ownership and you have the ability to have secondary sales. So I can go out, and as you mentioned, a really strong, like a very, very strong mobile game right now has 4 to 5% conversion, right? So 1.5 overall, 4 to 5, which means the best games out there are making hundreds of millions of dollars off of 5% of their players, right? So if you could suddenly take that player that's grinding, those other 95% are very important to the economy, though. They're very important to leaderboards and alliances and clans, or whatever you want to call them, guilds, all that type of stuff. It's really important to the growth of the game. But if you could suddenly take a segment of that users and they grind the game and they get an asset that they combine with something else, and that becomes a rare asset, and they can have an easy way to liquidate that. And not like a very complicated process, but if you can have a very easy way to liquidate that and they have money show up, they become a game entrepreneur. And we think that's the most powerful category that can come out of this. Is the speculators are great, they'll always be there, right? But the game entrepreneurs, that starts changing the dynamic. That's how you start getting the next level of growth, is when people can come in, they can play something, they can grind the worlds they're already playing already, get something interesting, and now what do they do with it? Do they take the money and run? Probably not. They're probably going to reinvest into it again, right?
Yeah, but you are assuming that every player could be an entrepreneur.
You give the ability to be an entrepreneur,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think casual gamers are not really into economics regarding games. They just want to have fun,
So maybe if I can add to this, right? I think our view on this is that there's a lot of capital. It's not just cash capital, it's also social capital, right? And games are 95% social capital and 5% real capital. And if you look at something like Facebook, all that social capital belongs entirely to Facebook. Now imagine in a game economy where that's actually suddenly shared, the social capital is real value of some sort, and that actually is co-owned. That's kind of a completely different paradigm shift. Yeah. And if you knew you co-owned that economy, what is your sort of invested interest? And we've seen cases like EVE Online or Second Life. I mean, they're micro cases, but they have essentially GDPs that are like hundreds of millions of dollars at one point because they trusted that aspect. And if you can take that to a global gamer market, you would have probably economies larger than most countries.
Well, the gaming space is no different from any consumer space in blockchain. In fact, it's probably faster. You know, when the ICO boom was going on, there were many, many game companies coming on. And you've had some games. We've had CryptoKitties. We've had people developing it. In most consumer applications, there aren't many blockchain solutions. The blockchain crypto community is very small. In fact, one big game is probably bigger than the entire crypto community. And the platforms and protocols can't scale for the sort of numbers that we need at the moment.
Yeah, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think there's a couple issues around that. One is just the UX and the process and the exchanges. You know, anybody that's sent money to somebody else and held their breath for 30 seconds to hope it hits, that's not what a common consumer is going to do, right? That's just the average consumer is not going to deal with that. But also, do you have to be trading in coins, right? I really don't think you need to be trading in tokens. I think blockchain is different than cryptocurrencies, and I think that's one big thing that I don't think the studios are thinking about cryptocurrencies that big. Like, you guys are very out there in terms of the other studios, right?
I was actually talking about blockchain, not crypto.
But blockchain, you don't have to have a cryptocurrency to trade that.
No, you don't. But you need to write to a blockchain, and writing to a blockchain is slow. So a big game would crash in these systems at the moment.
We're not right to the public chains.
But it's very typical what happens in Amara's law. You know, 2017, everyone was very excited. We thought by 2020, everybody would be in the space, as we did in every space in blockchain. It wasn't just gaming. And it doesn't meet the demands of the customer. And then people forget about it. This is what happened in the internet crash. And then 10 years' time, we look back and go, how on earth did we get here? And it's also very typical of disruption. You know, disruption comes from places you don't expect. It's unlikely to come from the AAA studios. It's more likely to come from the smaller players that suddenly have something that is very aggressive. And just to look at the model on the whole, Bitcoin is a digital representation of a physical product, money. Games are a digital representation of the physical world, and they're becoming more lifelike every year. So it's actually the most obvious use case, I would have thought, to use the blockchain solution.
And I think it still is, yeah.
It is incredibly.
I think coming back to your point, what's interesting, because we've got some good example here, is the big AAA companies, because they are normally publicly owned and obviously come under kind of regulatory scrutiny, and they don't want necessarily the risk involved with blockchain when there's not much reward. So what you see, I guess John here is a great example of talented people within what we would think of as the established AAA companies deciding this is a really big opportunity. I can't do it in my existing company. I'm going to come out, you know, and obviously, you know, you guys came mainly for Activision and Blizzard. We've seen other people coming out of Kabam. Yeah. So it's actually, I guess, because these are new companies, they're not kind of well-known entities because they've not released games yet, and no one knows who they are. But there are some pretty, or extremely well-funded, extremely talented groups who are coming out, and because they know a game takes 2 years to build, we've not heard anything from them. I mean,
but I think there's some misconceptions too. Like, I think if you walk into Activision right now and say, we can build you a token economy for Call of Duty, they're going to show you to the door. They just don't care, right?
Well, but no one could anyway, could they?
But if you say, hey, we're going to take blockchain technology and we're going to build a new way for esports teams to interact with your game and bring more loyalty into your game, bring these brands that influence users and have a way to actually profit and make money from that, they're going to listen, right? So I think that's the thing, is I think there's this misconception around like, when's Call of Duty going to be on the blockchain? They're probably not, and they probably won't ever in that franchise, right? It'll be some other franchise that does it. But how could they use a blockchain product? And you can sub in any studio, right? Any game. How do they use blockchain to do more interesting things? That is real, and I think that's going to be powerful. And I think that's the things that we've kind of missed from the overall picture of gaming, of like, oh yeah, just flip a switch and we're all going to be trading tokens in games. That's not what it is. It's an evolution of gaming. We don't really need a revolution in gaming because it's not broken. Gaming's not broken. You know, we need an evolution of these things we want to do. Things you guys done with, like, how do you mine currency using blockchain? That's cool, right? And those are the things that eventually could hit consumer adoption. How do you have ownership of assets of F1 or Formula 1 race cars? That's fascinating, right? But I don't think we need, like, I think the idea of just saying, hey, we're going to flip a game onto blockchain and it's going to work, it's just not interesting, right? It doesn't need to happen.
Well, you might say gaming's not broken, but it's not a very good economy. You know, they're 2.5 billion users.
It is for the AAA companies who get all the money.
Well, not in real world terms. You know, it's got 2.5 billion users, creating, I don't know, 2.5 trillion, $18 trillion worth of effort, creating 140 billion. That is a terrible economy. You know, the US has a fraction of those people, and it has an $18 trillion economy. And this is the point. The point is 1.5% of people pay for games and buy things in games. It should be much higher. That is not a very good use of the
it's much
time.
higher in AAA games, so, yeah.
It is higher in some areas.
Yeah, I mean, Call of Duty is 100% monetized, right? I mean, it's, you
But
know what I'm
that, is
saying?
why,
Like,
but that is why this model is so good for a lot of people. It can turn many more of the players into profit centers, and it can make them share in the profit, and that's a very effective thing to do.
I think the one thing that is interesting for the established game companies is the potential disruption that comes from the old model, because game companies design the games essentially, particularly for online games, MMOs, for selling content. And the problem is that if you have very high value content, then how do I actually sell more content? Because that's the model that game companies have. So in some ways, game companies are very much sort of designed in an inflationary manner. And so as a game company, then that means you have to be comfortable with, okay, so I did a pre-sale of, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars. Everyone has these items. Are they going to trade these items in such quantity that I can make the same amount of revenue year after year? And that's dangerous. And it's a parallel that's kind of similar to mobile games too. I remember when we used to do console games, and we switched over to mobile. We lost 2/3 of our mobile sort of console team because they're like, first of all, I'm not touching that, it's demeaning, it's not a real game. And then the second one is that, wait, this is something that you used to sell for $50, and now I'm making something for $1.99, right? And because people couldn't imagine that the market would get bigger. And that was dangerous as well. But companies like Activision, it's okay, or Ubisoft, I think for you, if you see something that works, you just go buy them, right?
Yeah, but that's the point, actually. There is another misconception. We are talking a lot about the UX challenge in blockchain, but in my opinion, I always say it's not a UX challenge, it's a tech challenge or an ecosystemic challenge. Because we believe that we can build games without thinking about the whole ecosystem of first-party tools, etc., etc. So, and at some point, we think that we could use blockchain just like that. And in fact, blockchain is just not yet plugged to the all ecosystems. And then, yes, if it was a part of the actual gaming ecosystem, yes, we will use it just like that.
Yeah.
But no, it's not. So when we are saying it's a UX problem, it is, but it is because we don't do KYC in gamings. We are, in a way, in a position where we have to use cryptocurrency if we want some kind of certain level of decentralization. It's not always necessary, but for now. So it's more a question of are we able to, to build some bridges between what is existing in the blockchain, very small blockchain ecosystem, and the rest of the gaming ecosystem.
I mean, I think you're exactly right. And we talk about mobile a lot because some of us worked in mobile games, or actually quite a lot of us did, didn't we? And it was kind of interesting that if you look at the growth of the games industry over the last 10 years, pretty much all that growth, it's doubled pretty much. All that growth has come from mobile games and specifically from Asian players of mobile games. Yeah. And AAA's not gone away. AAA's still there, but most people wouldn't say a mobile game, even a Supercell game, wouldn't class that as a AAA game, even though it's done billions of dollars. I think the last count that I made, there were 22 mobile games that had done over $1 billion of lifetime revenue. And that's in the last 5 years. It's staggering. So I don't think in the blockchain space, I don't think anyone is thinking this, but we'd be foolish to try and copy what is a AAA game and try and bring that to the blockchain. Surely what will happen is we will evolve. I mean, maybe we don't call them blockchain games, but a different sort of game. As free-to-play mobile came along, we use these components in different ways, different implementations. But something very new will arise.
But if you agree. But if you look at, for instance, what mobile gaming really did for AAA gaming, it expanded it. Right? I mean, I remember this comment when sort of Sony was like, "Wow, the PlayStation's selling so well." Like, I don't know what's going on. And obviously, the reason was because so many people started playing mobile, the whole audience got bigger, and of that audience, a percentage of them were like, "Oh, this is great, right? I like playing games. I never played games before. Maybe I played Candy Crush. Maybe I played something else." And now on a AAA experience where I'm actually sitting down and playing. So console sales for both Xbox and PlayStation have never been bigger than before. So it's expanded the market.
That's right.
And I think for us, the thinking is we think blockchain will add another expansion to market, right? Because now people can be passive gamers. right? You couldn't be a passive gamer before because you basically, like, you have to play, you have to interact. It's like if I'm to be a Facebook investor, I have to be an active social media user. No, you can now be a passive participant as well. So that means new people will come in, and maybe a percentage of those will say, oh, you know what, let me try that actual non-blockchain game, or let me try that console experience. So I think it'll just expand it.
Well, I think the demographics are on the side of the gamers. The more people that come through, the more people that are being born now, the more people that are dying. The older generation are much lesser gamers, and the younger are much greater gamers. My kids play a lot more than I did when I was a kid, and my parents didn't play at all, and probably didn't until they died. So the demographics are on their side, and I think you're absolutely right. Gaming is a very fast expanding use of people's time. As technologies like AI take off in the real world, we may have more free time. That means we'll dedicate more time to virtual worlds. The other thing that I find amazing about games is they become more and more lifelike and more engaging all the time. You look at Tomb Raider in the 80s and 90s, and it was a little stick woman. And now it's an entire ecosystem, which means that people are going to spend more time. And therefore, new technologies like blockchain, new technologies like any of the new technologies that comes around will just make it more immersive, and more people will play, and the market will expand enormously.
Yeah, but I think that, I don't know if it's, I agree with you, but I guess what I'm saying is it feels like blockchain's not going to just suddenly expand the audience, right? Just having the ability to have blockchain's not going to, what I think is going to be fascinating about blockchain is it shifts it, right? And that's the piece we haven't really been focusing as much on in terms of what's out there right now, is, if you just copy, if mobile just copied console, it wouldn't have taken off, right? It's its own model, it's its own mechanics, it's its own palette of tools that created this new industry, right? The fact we went from, well, we still have $60 titles, but from $60 titles to free to play, that was just because we kind of used that medium for what it was great at. And I think the same thing's going to happen with blockchain. I think, to me, the biggest thing that I think the biggest thing that blockchain can do is it's going to shift us away from the loot box economy, which is very much a mobile type mechanic. I think blockchain changes that. Again, if you have a primary and a secondary mechanic, you can do all types of really cool stuff that you can't do right now, right? So if I were some brand, so I pick a brand. What a brand? Hello Kitty. You guys work at Hello Kitty, right? So if you're Hello Kitty and you're going to put assets into a game, you're going to try and maximize that primary revenue, right? You're going to try and sell as many of those as you possibly can to make it worth your effort. But in blockchain, and where these things start becoming really, really fascinating, and this is what I get pumped about and why we left the kind of traditional game space to do this, is that when you have a primary and secondary ability, I can sell some of those assets to maximize primary sales, because then the secondary value is not going to be super high because I can just go buy the primary. But now I can do things like time-based releases, right? I can sell an asset, I can sell a special Hello Kitty that's only available Saturday from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., right? Now you're starting to pull more of what's happening in retail right now with sneakerhead models, with the Supreme models, with the Bathing Apes, with all these different brands. You can now apply that into gaming. And now you know what you're buying, but maybe you don't know how many are out there. You don't know how many you're going to sell in that 1 hour. So you kind of shifted. We've been calling it a FOMO model. So instead of a loot box model, it's a FOMO model, because I have 1 hour to buy that asset, or the only way I can buy it at that point is from a second player. So now what happens in that case is a brand could do that because, yeah, they only sold 1,000 in that 1 hour, but those 1,000 are worth $400 a piece in the secondary market, and they're getting a cut of that every time. So that's what's fascinating to me, and that's where the AAAs, I know that's where the AAAs will, as soon as they see that in play, as soon as they see those metrics, as soon as they see the game players that look at those metrics, they're going to come for the space.
Could I just add to that? Please. Because that's absolutely right. It's a very fascinating thing. You know, the number of people I talked to, I actually met a guy in UAE last year that spent $600,000 on gaming last year. Yeah. And he said, I feel like a complete idiot. And the reason he felt like, he was a very nice guy. The reason he felt like an idiot, and I find it very difficult to buy things in games, is it's a purchase that is worth zero. So if someone came to me and said, you can buy any car you want, here's one for $200,000 and here's one for 10 or whatever, you look at the depreciation. And you're never going to buy a very expensive car if it's worth zero as soon as you take it out the lot. What this does, in my opinion, is as soon as you make something have a retained value afterwards, greater or lesser, the purchase decision is much easier. If I spend $600,000, it's worth $800,000 or $400,000. That decision is completely different from $600,000 is zero. And I think that's really fascinating, and I just wanted to add that to what you said.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, just I agree on what you just said. It's creating new kind of value, and we have to understand better what is the value is involved and how we can create this value. But I kind of disagree on the just what you've said about, okay, we can open a range of 1 hour, and in which, because today we can hear players really.
You lost your mic there.
Thank you. We can hear players complain about too many monetization mechanics, you know.
Yeah.
And here it's just playing on FOMO, so it's kind of. I'm not sure it's.
No, I mean look at Fortnite.
Especially in AAA games.
Yeah, but if you look at Fortnite right now, right? The Marshmallow event happened 4 seasons ago, and you could buy Marshmallow for $15 in the store. I don't know if you look on eBay right now, there's people that are illegally selling their entire accounts for $350, $400, right? So that's an example of a very popular game right now that you can already see that inflation and that increase in value of that asset purely because it's not available anymore. So if you suddenly have, now the problem with that is that you have a lot of fraud, like putting your information. The reason that studios don't like that is one, it violates their EULA. 2, it's very dangerous for players to do that. You can get a lot of fraud, you get a lot of customer service problems to where you suddenly, like, people got ripped off and they weren't able to get the asset, but they thought they were buying it on eBay or whatever, right? But if you can address that, and you can address that through blockchain tech, and I think it's most important, the game developer and whoever creates that content gets a cut of that, which is very important to game studios, that if I'm enabling someone to buy that asset again, I want a little bit of money for that, right? If you start enabling that, again, it's a palette of tools, right? It's up to the designers, and every game will be a little different, but it really shifts very quickly how you design a game and what the possibilities are.
Yeah, but you have to be aware that you are opening some kind of Pandora box, and that there can be ethical issue around that. But I have the same opinion on play to earn. You know, that is a desperation in the ecosystem.
Play to earn. Nope.
Yeah, you're out now too.
Okay. Anyway, so play to earn, where that's interesting is also though because of blockchain, the provenance can be attached to every action you take. Right? So before, if I buy a sword in a game, it's the same sword, even if they say it's permanent. But now, with blockchain, you can actually see the history that goes behind it. And so if you look at esports, for instance, as an industry, suddenly, if I'm actually buying this sword that was owned by an esports champion, or even for that matter, something that was maybe passed down in generations because my parents used it and I'm giving it to my children, there's a sentimental value, but that is value that wasn't possible before.
That's right.
And now this aspect makes it valuable maybe only to 10 people or 20 people, but now it scales across billions of people potentially who have these other attached areas of values, and therefore it becomes collectibles.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I personally am very excited about, although it's not there yet, is where I think interoperability might come in. So that's kind of where, like, dream scenario.
That's another talk. Definitely next year, maybe 2 years away. Yeah. Just like to say, we've got 8 minutes left. We have this this Slido account. So if you do have a question, if you go to Slido and fill in the code BlockShow 2019, you can send us a question. Continuing on from what we've been saying, I wonder actually if this new kind of business model where you're basically the developers has a one-off sale and then is basically trying to drive as much transactional value as possible to take their small slice. That's obviously where blockchain games are. Now, I wonder, obviously it depends on how many transactions there are, but can that level of revenue, in the short term at least, sustain the kind of size of companies that we've kind of seen in games? So at the moment, Call of Duty, how many hundred of people work on that? No idea. But clearly it probably costs over $100 million to make that game. And that's fine because they know they can sell $60, whatever, to millions of people. Blockchain games, I don't think, are going to be very different on that model. So will we see a different sort of company in that kind of organizational scale, do you think?
Well, I think just the CryptoKitty example is there,
Yeah, but they don't care about that number of sales volume for CryptoKitties.
That's my point. My point is they sold 10 CryptoKitties a day and crashed the network. Yeah. The networks are not there for millions of transactions a day, and for games that you're developing, they have, on day one they have millions of users. It's just not there. It's going to take quite a while before these projects have an element. So I think, elements of these things, small companies that are trying things out, that have got a much longer horizon, they don't have shareholders, they're testing these things, that's where they come from. That's why, you've got companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple now that 30 years ago, most of them didn't even exist. It's because they've got time to build consumer bases until the model is there.
But I think it means different things to different studios, and I think that's one thing. I feel like we're trying to fit, square peg and round hole, right? To where it's like everybody has to have a token, everything is going to be tokenized. I really think that blockchain usage will be different per game, right? I mean, Ubisoft has a ton of games, and all those games are designed very differently. They have different loops, they have different type of consumers, they have different objectives of that game, right? And so does every game out there. And I think, again, blockchain is a palette of tools. So some games it'll be, yeah, I want to create a UGC economy that anybody can participate in and become entrepreneurs. That could be one type of game. It could also be, hey, I just want to do it for verified who got there first, right? Who was playing Zelda and got to that level first, right? That's another use of it. It could be esports. I think esports and influencers will probably be the best use of that in the short term. Influencers and esports teams are driving a lot of marketing effort into these games, and they don't really have any type of residual off of that for that effort. And I think that is broken. I think that will be a broken economy very soon here if we don't fix that. And I think blockchain can fix some of that. If you can suddenly let esports teams, and whether or not, again, that could be different. It could be unofficial esports teams that anybody can come in and create their own gear, right? And sell that gear to their influence, the influence they have around their fans. Or it could be some of these games like an Overwatch that has official franchise teams. And maybe the only way you can sell in the game is if you're an official franchise team, right? So I think it really is going to be a palette of tools that every studio will have the ability to do something different with. And I think that's the power of where this goes. I think we as an industry right now are kind of cramming everybody into one focus, like, okay, we're going to basically do a pre-sale and we're going to sell this asset and it's going to be an NFT and it's going to be numbered. That's not really how it's going to play out, I don't think. I think it's going to be tools that people can build off of, right?
Disruption is going to come out from companies that aren't the major companies, because it's difficult for big companies to take these enormous challenges, which risk enormous business models that are incredibly profitable.
The big studios are watching.
Yes, but we will not just use blockchain immediately on our biggest AAA game, of course.
Exactly.
But as John said, we will just try on some dimension of the games and see if it works, etc., etc. So yeah, and just say it can also comes from new genre of games, new game genre, like it's not new, but fantasy sports. Actually, I really believe that there is a lot to do using the blockchain ability to be linked to real world data, from the rest of the world.
Right.
Okay, quick. We've got 4 minutes left, so I want us to kind of end on some actual kind of conclusion or something people can take away. So I know everyone hates this, but can we go through, think like a prediction for what's going to happen next year in the blockchain game space? Is it going to be, also we've got a lot of new games coming out. What would you like to see? What do you think is going to happen next year? Start with you. A minute each.
Okay, but anyway, yes, very quickly. So I think, first of all, the larger titles that people are working on, including basically what John's working on, what we're working on otherwise, these will all come out pretty much in 2020. And this will be the first wave of companies who are blockchain games built by gamers, which is different. Many of the blockchain games that you've seen before were built by really strong blockchain guys, but who haven't really built games. So there is a little bit of a paradigm change there. So I think you'll see that quality. I think the other thing that we'll also see is you won't see necessarily a large quantum of users coming in. Like you won't necessarily, I mean, I wish for it, but I don't think we'll have like 100 million people playing blockchain games next year. But I do think that the people who are designing these games will have to become much more value focused and much more like real economists. So when you do a pre-sale, you're actually thinking of it in terms of, well, how long is this going to last? When do I need to be ready for stage 2? Which is what people haven't had to think about before, right? So economic planning starts from game design, which is different than before, right?
Yep.
I agree. For me in 2020, I don't think there is much that will happen in the gaming industry. There will maybe some good games coming. I don't know. We'll see. But no, I'm more looking at stablecoins because I think also we didn't speak about stablecoin, but I think it's a way to attract more users. Because again, it's all about value, and if we have some kind of cryptocurrency that is not volatile, it will help us a lot to sell NFTs and help players to build content, etc., etc. So to have a real framework to build a strong in-game value.
Right. Yeah, I'll use this. So yeah, I think we'll see some games that'll actually hit 1 million players next year that are using blockchain. Again, I think there'll be a game. I think there'll be a game or two that'll hit 1 million players next year. With now, I'm not saying 1 million wallets. I'm not saying 1 million people signing up for wallets before you play. But I think you'll see a game next year with 1 million players that is being utilized. Blockchain's being utilized behind the scene. They might not know it. They might not care. They might not ever interact with it, right? But it's happening. I think it'll happen next year, and I think you'll start seeing a lot more adoption around that, whether they know it or not, which is kind of how it should be. They should just kind of use it and say, "Oh my God, I can play a game, and I can sell something, and I don't really need to know the rest," right? And I think that'll happen next year.
I think if it follows standard disruption, probably not much will happen next year, and in 15 years we'll look back and go, "How do we get here?" I sort of feel a bit like Walmart looking at Amazon in 2000 and going, so what? And 15 years later, Walmart are tiny and Amazon are enormous. And I think that's probably how we'll see it.
Okay, we do have one quick question that we can fit in. What are your views on the payment ecosystem of the entire gaming industry? Will having a universal game payment token be of value? A universal game token. Our thoughts on that very quickly.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
No.
Yeah, no, it just won't happen. It's just, I mean, there's just no way. There's no way that a Activision and a Ubisoft and a Square Enix and an EA are going to use the same token. There's just no way.
If it's built by Ubisoft, maybe.
Maybe if it's built by Ubisoft. You're the only ones that can pull it off. So there you go.
I think the only thing you might have actually is something like a Ripple, which is an exchange mechanism between the big ones, which is very quick and effective. But no, I don't think there'll be a one that's used by all of them.
Absolutely.
I think, and that's us done with 5
Perfect.
seconds over. Well done, everyone.
There we go. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.